The marketplace was alive with noise and colors, but one corner of it always fell silent when she walked past. People turned their backs, pulled their children close, and whispered behind their hands. Some looked at her with disgust, others with fear. Her name was Lyra, but most never spoke it. Instead, they called her Unfit. As if that was all she was, her skin was marked with strange swirling lines that glowed faintly under the sunlight. No one dared to touch her, not even by accident. Rumors filled the air. Some said the marks were a deadly infection. Others claimed it was the curse of the old gods. Lyra never argued, never defended herself. She just kept her head down and walked, carrying a small basket of withered fruit. She hoped to sell. Vendors often pretended not to hear her voice. When she tried to place her goods on a stall, they waved her away. One even threw a rag at her feet and told her to wipe the disease off the ground before she dared stand there. The crowd laughed. Lyra said nothing, her hands tightening around the handle of her basket. It had been like this for years. She had stopped hoping for anything different. That day, a human traveler entered the market. He was tall, with a worn coat and eyes that searched the crowd like he was looking for something. His name was Daniel, though no one here knew it yet. He moved with quiet confidence, stopping at stalls, exchanging a few coins for supplies. When he reached the far corner, his gaze landed on her. Daniel noticed the way people avoided her, as if she carried death in her shadow. He saw the way she kept her eyes low, as if meeting anyone's gaze would be a crime. Something in his chest tightened. Then it happened, one of the bigger vendors. A man with thick arms and a mean grin stepped into Lyra's path. "You again?" he sneered. "Didn't I tell you not to come here?" Lyra bowed her head, murmuring that she only wanted to sell her fruit. The vendor slapped the basket from her hands, sending the fruit rolling across the dusty ground. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the market. Lyra dropped to her knees, trying to gather them quickly before anyone stepped on them. But the man shoved her hard. She fell sideways, her palms scraping against the rough stone. Daniel's steps were slow but steady as he approached. The vendor barked, "Stay back, human, unless you want her filth on you." The crowd expected him to turn away like everyone else. Instead, he crouched down beside her. Lyra froze, her heart pounding in her chest. His hand reached out toward her open, steady, without fear. For a moment, she thought he might stop halfway like others. Sometimes did. But his fingers touched hers, warm and firm. The marketplace seemed to go silent. Gasps escaped from the crowd. It was the first time in years anyone had dared to touch her skin. Daniel gently helped her to her feet, his eyes never leaving hers. "You dropped these," he said softly. Placing the bruised fruit back into her hands, Lyra couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight. No one had spoken to her like a person in so long. The vendor spat on the ground, muttering about fools who didn't know better. Daniel ignored him. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm. She nodded slowly, unsure if this was kindness or some trick. "Then let's get you out of here," he said, stepping beside her like an equal. As they walked away, whispers followed them. Some called Daniel reckless. Others said he would regret it, but he didn't look back. For Lyra, every step away from that marketplace felt strange, like she was walking in a dream. Her hands still remembered the warmth of his. Her chest ached with something she hadn't felt in years. The fragile spark of hope. Lyra walked beside Daniel, still unsure why he had helped her. Her basket was heavier now, not because of the bruised fruit inside, but because her hands kept remembering the warmth of his. No one had touched her in years, not by mistake, not out of kindness, not for anything. Even the wind felt gentler on her skin. After that moment, Daniel glanced at her every few steps, noticing the way she kept her gaze low. "You live nearby?" he asked, his voice casual. She nodded. pointing toward the far edge of the city where small broken huts clung to the hills. "All right," he said. "Let's walk there together." Her heart raced, not because of danger, but because she couldn't remember the last time someone had wanted to walk with her at all. They passed another stall on the way. An old woman vendor watched them closely. Her eyes sharp. When Daniel asked for bread, the woman leaned forward and whispered, "You shouldn't be near her, human. She's unfit to touch." Daniel didn't even blink. "Then I guess I'm unfit too," he replied, placing coins on the table. The woman muttered curses, but handed him the bread anyway. He tore it in half and gave one piece to Lyra without hesitation. Lyra held the bread like it was a rare gift. She could feel eyes on her from every direction, but Daniel's calm presence made her spine straighten just a little. "You don't care?" she asked quietly. "About what?" He said, "About what they say I am." He looked at her for a moment before answering. "I care about what I see, not what I'm told." They reached the narrow path that led toward her hut. The wind carried the smell of the sea, and the distant sound of waves broke the silence between them. Daniel stopped and turned to her. "Can I see your hands?" he asked. Her stomach tightened. No one had ever asked that before. She hesitated, then slowly extended them toward him, palms up. The strange glowing lines on her skin seemed brighter in the light. Daniel studied them carefully, his fingers tracing the edges without fear. Her breath caught. The touch was gentle, almost careful, as if he didn't want to hurt her. "You've been carrying this alone for a long time," he said softly. She swallowed hard, feeling her eyes sting. "Yes," she whispered. "All my life." Daniel didn't let go. "Who told you it was something to be ashamed of?" he asked. She shook her head, not ready to speak of the past. Instead, she pulled her hands back, but not quickly, almost like she didn't want to, but thought she should. He noticed, but didn't push. "All right," he said gently. "I won't ask." "Not yet." They walked again, and soon her small hut came into view. Its roof was patched with old cloth, the walls leaning as if tired from years of wind and rain. Inside, there was little more than a mat, a clay jar for water, and a small fire pit. Daniel stepped inside without hesitation, ducking under the low doorway. "You live here, alone?" he asked. She nodded. "No one wants to be near me." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing for a moment. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the floor and set the bread between them. They ate in silence at first, the crackle of the small fire filling the room. When Lyra's hands trembled, Daniel reached out again, placing his hand lightly over hers. Her head jerked up in surprise. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You don't have to be afraid of me for a long time." She simply looked at him, trying to see if he was lying, but there was no mockery in his eyes. No pity, only a calm, steady warmth. Her shoulders loosened for the first time in years. The firelight danced across her glowing markings. And Daniel didn't look away. Instead, he smiled slightly. "There. Beautiful." Her breath caught again. No one had ever used that word for her before. Outside, the evening sky was turning gold. Somewhere in the distance, market bells rang, calling the end of the trading day. But inside the small hut, the world felt quieter, safer for the first time in years. Lyra's hands didn't feel like a curse. They felt like something worth holding. And in that moment, she realized something dangerous. She didn't want this human to leave. Night had settled over the hills, and the small fire in Lyra's hut cast long shadows on the walls. Daniel sat near the doorway, sharpening a small knife he used for travel. Lyra sat opposite him, her knees pulled close to her chest, the faint glow of her skin painting soft patterns on the floor. She kept her hands hidden in the folds of her dress, though he had already seen them. The fire popped, breaking the silence. "Those lines," Daniel said quietly, "they mean something, don't they?" Lyra's eyes lifted for just a moment, then dropped again. "They mean I'm cursed," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the crackle of the fire. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "That's what they told you, not what they are." She didn't answer, her lips pressed tight in the market earlier. Daniel had heard whispers. Most were insults, but one voice, a drunk traitor, had muttered something strange. "She's royal blood, exiled," the man had said before stumbling away. The words had stuck in Daniel's mind. Now, looking at her in the firelight, he saw more than just markings. He saw symbols, deliberate and precise, not random scars. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight," Daniel said, "but I want to understand." Lyra's fingers tightened around her dress. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "I was born in the palace of Velith. My father was one of the king's advisors." Daniel kept his expression calm, letting her continue. "When I was 16, a sickness spread in the city. Many died," she said, her eyes distant. "They said I brought it. They said I was touched by evil spirits. My father denied it, but..." Her voice broke for a moment. She took a slow breath. "One night, guards came to our home. They took me from my bed, dragged me to the palace square, and in front of everyone, they branded me." Daniel's jaw clenched. "They called it the mark of shame," she said, pulling her sleeve up to reveal the lines running along her arm. "Glowing faintly even now. They told people if they touched me, the sickness would spread and they'd die within days." Her voice was flat, as if she had repeated these words in her mind for years. Daniel shook his head slowly. "And you believed them?" She gave a bitter smile. "What choice did I have? Everyone I knew turned away, even the ones who once called me friend." Silence hung between them, broken only by the soft hiss of the fire. Daniel reached for a small leather pouch from his bag, pulling out a folded piece of cloth he held it out to her. "Give me your hand," she hesitated, her eyes flicking toward his face. Searching for mockery or pity, finding none, she slowly placed her hand in his. Daniel began to gently wipe along the glowing lines. Up close, he could see that the markings were not burned deep like a normal brand. They were almost like ink. "Beneath the skin, they're not sickness," he said firmly. "They're something else. Maybe even something important." Lyra's lips trembled. "It doesn't matter, Daniel. The people believe what they want, then we'll show them the truth," he replied without hesitation. Her eyes widened slightly. No one had ever spoken of fighting this lie before. For a long time, they sat in silence, the weight of his words settling between them. In the distance, a dog barked, and the wind shifted, bringing the salty smell of the sea. But outside, not everyone was asleep. In the shadows near her hut, too, figures crouched, watching through a small crack in the wall. One whispered, "The human is touching her." Without fear, the other grunted, "The elders will want to know." Their footsteps faded into the night. Inside, Lyra felt a sudden chill. Though the fire was warm, Daniel noticed her shiver. "Are you cold?" She shook her head slowly. "No. Just remembering." Her eyes were far away now, back in the palace square, back in that moment under the torches when her life had been torn apart. Daniel's voice was steady. "Whatever they did to you, whatever lies they told, it's not who you are." She looked at him, studying his face in the flickering light. There was no fear there, only resolve for the first time. She let herself imagine it, a life where people didn't look away, where children didn't cry at her presence. It was dangerous to hope, but sitting here, with this human who dared to touch her hands, she couldn't stop the thought from forming. Maybe the mark of shame wasn't shame at all. Morning light spilled over the hills, painting the market in gold. The air was full of smells, fresh bread, fried root vegetables, and salt from the sea. Lyra stood at the edge of the street, holding her basket, unsure if she should even be here. Daniel stood beside her, his arms crossed. scanning the crowd like he was on watch duty. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I do." He replied simply, "If we hide, they win." She swallowed, her eyes darting toward the vendors who were already staring at them. It felt like walking into enemy territory. Daniel stepped forward, and she followed, her hands tight around the basket handle. The first stall they passed sold fabric. The vendor's smile froze when he saw Lyra, his hand moving to wave her away. But before he could speak, Daniel reached out and picked up a length of bright blue cloth. "How much?" he asked. The vendor hesitated. "For you?" "2 coins, Daniel nodded, placing the coins on the table. "Good, we'll take it." The vendor glanced at Lyra like she was a shadow. Daniel didn't flinch. He handed the fabric directly to her, letting his fingers brush hers in plain view. Of everyone, gasps rose from nearby stalls. Lyra felt her cheeks burn, not from shame, but from the shock of being treated like she mattered. Daniel moved on, his voice calm. "Next stall." They stopped at a fruit stand. The merchant shook his head immediately. "I don't sell to her." Daniel's gaze hardened. "Then you don't sell to me either." He turned to leave, and the merchant, not wanting to lose a paying customer, quickly said, "Wait." "Fine, take it." Daniel smiled faintly, placing the fruit into Lyra's basket himself. Everywhere they went, it was the same. People whispered. Some pointed. Others stepped back like they feared the air around her. But Daniel never moved away. Never acted as if she was dangerous. By the time they reached the far end of the market, she realized something. Her shoulders weren't hunched anymore. She was walking taller, still. Danger lingered in the edges of the crowd, from the corner of her eye. Lyra saw a group of young men watching them with cold eyes. One spat on the ground as they passed. Another muttered loud enough for her to hear, "The human will regret touching her." Daniel's head turned slightly. His voice even say that again. The group fell silent, unsure if they wanted a fight. Lyra tugged at his sleeve. "Don't. It's not worth it." Daniel glanced at her. "You are worth it." The words caught her off guard. No one had ever said them to her. Not once in her life. The simple truth in his tone made her chest feel both heavy and light at the same time. They finished their shopping and started toward the hills. The streets felt different now, not friendlier, but not as suffocating. Lyra noticed a few people who didn't turn away as quickly as before. A mother holding her child even nodded politely when Daniel greeted her. It was small, but it was something. When they reached her hut, Lyra placed the basket down and touched the blue cloth Daniel had bought. "It's too fine for me," she said softly. "It's not fine enough." He replied with a small smile. She looked at him, wondering if he really understood what he was doing. "You're making enemies," she warned. "I've had worse." He said simply. That night, the wind carried more than the sound of the sea. It carried voices down in the village. Word was spreading fast. The human who touched the unfit girl. The one who bought her gifts. The one who walked beside her like she was his equal. Some called him brave, others called him a fool. But for the first time, Lyra realized that her story was being told. Not just the one they made up, but the one she was living now, far away. In the grand halls of the palace, a different kind of whisper reached the ears of the ruler. The marked girl was seen again, walking through the market with a human. The ruler's eyes narrowed. "She was supposed to disappear," he said, his voice cold as steel. "Shall we take action?" asked one of his guards. "Not yet," the ruler replied. "Let's see how far they think they can go." Back in her hut, Lyra sat by the fire, tracing the lines on her skin. For the first time, she didn't see them as a brand. She saw them as something that hadn't broken her. Daniel's words from earlier echoed in her mind. "You are worth it." And though fear still lived in her heart, another feeling was starting to grow beside it. Hope. The moon hung low over the hills, casting pale silver light on the quiet path to Lyra's hut. The market's noise was far behind them now, replaced by the sound of distant waves and the rustle of dry grass in the wind. Daniel walked beside her, carrying the basket while she clutched the blue cloth close to her chest like a shield. They had spent the day facing stares and whispers, but the air tonight felt heavier, like something unseen was watching. Halfway to the hut, Daniel slowed, his eyes scanning the shadows. Lyra noticed too the silence around them was wrong. No dogs barking in the distance, no voices from nearby huts. The wind carried only the faint creak of something moving in the dark. They reached a narrow bend in the path when it happened. Figures stepped out from the tall grass, blocking their way. There were 4 of them. Dressed in dark clothes, faces half covered, one carried a short blade, another a heavy wooden club. Daniel's grip on the basket tightened before he set it gently on the ground. "Well, look at this," one of them sneered, the cursed girl. And her human pet, Lyra, froze, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Daniel stepped in front of her without hesitation, his voice calm but sharp. "Step aside," the man with the blade laughed. "Or what? You'll catch her sickness for her." The others chuckled, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. One moved to grab Lyra, but Daniel's hand shot out, seizing the attacker's wrist and twisting it hard. The man yelped, dropping the blade to the ground. Daniel kicked it away, his stance low and ready, but another rushed in from the side, swinging the club. Daniel blocked with his forearm, gritting his teeth at the impact. "Run, Lyra," he shouted, but she didn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the ground. The third attacker came at Daniel from behind, but he spun and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him stumbling back. The first man, now furious, lunged for Lyra again. This time she stepped back just in time, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel caught him by the collar and slammed him against the nearest tree. "Stay away from her," he growled. The others hesitated now. The human was stronger than they expected, but numbers were still on their side, and they began circling. Daniel kept himself between them and Lyra, shifting with every step they took. One feinted left, then darted right toward Lyra. Daniel moved fast, grabbing the man's arm and using his momentum to throw him to the ground. The club wielder tried to rush in, but Daniel caught him across the jaw with a hard punch. Blood sprayed from the man's mouth, and he staggered back, swearing. The fight was messy, brutal. Daniel's breath came in sharp bursts, his fists aching from the blows. One attacker managed to slash at his shoulder with a small hidden knife, and he hissed. In pain, Lyra gasped, stepping forward, but Daniel barked, "Stay back." Even injured, he stood his ground. Finally, the attackers began to falter. One muttered, "Not worth it," and backed away. The others followed, spitting curses but retreating into the darkness of the tall grass. Daniel didn't move until their footsteps faded completely. Then he turned to Lyra, his breathing heavy. "You're hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "It's nothing," he replied. Though blood darkened his sleeve, she stepped closer, her hand shaking as she touched his arm gently. "You could have died," she whispered. His gaze softened. "So could you." She didn't know what to say. For years, no one had even looked at her without disgust. Now here was someone willing to fight, to bleed, to protect her without asking for anything in return. Her eyes burned, and before she could stop herself, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Why?" she asked, voice breaking. Daniel's answer was simple, steady, "Because you're worth protecting." The words shattered something inside her, the wall she had built around her heart. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. The night air was cold, the path still dangerous, but for a moment she felt warm. Because someone had chosen her, not out of pity, but out of choice. Daniel picked up the basket, wincing at the pain in his arm. "Let's get home," he said. They walked in silence, but it wasn't the heavy silence of fear anymore. It was the quiet that follows a promise, the kind that says, no matter what comes, you're not alone anymore. The next morning, Lyra woke to the sound of waves crashing harder than usual. Her sleep had been broken by flashes of the attack, the sound of boots in the grass, the sight of Daniel's blood. She found him outside, already awake, sharpening his knife with his injured arm tied in a strip of blue cloth. "You shouldn't be moving," she said softly. He looked up, his expression steady. "We can't wait anymore." "Wait for what?" "She asked for them to come again," he said. "Or for you to spend the rest of your life hiding." Her chest tightened. "There's no winning against them, Daniel. They control everything. Then we go to where they are," he replied, his tone firm. She stared at him, realizing what he meant. "The palace?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "It's time they hear the truth from your own mouth." The walk to the city center was long and tense. Daniel kept a hand near the knife at his belt, his eyes scanning for movement in the alleys. Lyra followed each step, feeling heavier than the last. She hadn't been near the palace in years, not since that night when they dragged her there under torchlight. Her palms were damp, her heart pounding against her ribs. When they reached the wide stone road leading to the palace gates, people began to notice them. Whispers spread fast, the cursed girl and her human protector walking straight toward the seat of power. Some pointed, some scoffed. Others followed out of curiosity. By the time they reached the gate, a crowd had formed behind them. 2 guards stepped forward, spears crossed. "No entry," one said sharply, "especially not for her." Daniel's voice cut through the murmurs. "We're not here to beg. We're here to speak." The guards exchanged a glance, one smirking. "The king doesn't speak to disease." Lyra flinched at the word. But Daniel didn't move. "Then you'll tell him this," Daniel said, stepping closer. "The people are watching, and they'll hear what I say, whether you open those gates or not." The crowd stirred, voices rising in curiosity and anger. Some shouted for the gates to open, others yelled insults. At Lyra, Daniel's voice grew louder, carrying across the square, "This woman is not cursed," Kai said. "She was marked to hide the truth because she is of royal blood, and someone wanted her gone." Gasps broke through the crowd. The guards stiffened, unsure if they should silence him or let the spectacle play out. Lyra stood frozen, every muscle tight. Her story had lived in the shadows for years, and now it was being thrown into the light. Daniel stepped aside slightly, his hand motioning toward her. "Tell them," he said softly. Her throat felt dry. But when she looked at the faces around her, some cruel rue, some curious something in her heart pushed her forward. "My father was an advisor to the king," she began, her voice shaky but growing stronger. "When the sickness came, they blamed me, but I was not sick." She pulled back her sleeve, showing the glowing lines on her skin. "This is not disease. It is the mark of shame, burned into me so the people would fear me." Gasps and mutters filled the air. They said, "Anyone who touched me would die," she continued. "But here stands a man who has touched my hands, eaten my food, fought for me, and still lives." Daniel stepped forward again, his voice sharp. "They lied to you to protect their power, and they used her as the shield for that lie." The crowd began to split, some yelling for proof, others demanding justice. Up on the palace balcony, movement caught Daniel's eye. A tall figure in fine robes had appeared. The ruler himself, flanked by guards, his voice boomed down. "To the square, remove them." The guards at the gate tightened their grips. But the crowd surged forward. Voices shouted over one another, "Let her speak. She's cursed. We want the truth." The tension thickened like storm clouds. Daniel stood tall, locking eyes with the ruler above. "If you're so certain she's cursed," he called out, then touch her yourself." The crowd gasped again. The ruler's face stayed calm, but his hands gripped the balcony railing tighter. He did not come down. Instead, he turned and disappeared back into the palace. The gates stayed closed, but the damage was done. The people had seen the hesitation. The fear. Daniel turned to Lyra, his voice low. "It's not over, but they're listening now." Her legs felt weak, but a strange fire was building in her chest for the first time. The palace wasn't just a place of nightmares. It was a place where she might one day return without chains. And beside her stood the man who had made that seem possible. The square outside the palace was restless for days after Daniel and Lyra's stand. Whispers turned to conversations, conversations turned to arguments. And arguments became loud public demands. People who had once avoided Lyra now spoke of the ruler's silence. They remembered how he had refused to touch her, how he had vanished instead of proving his own words. Daniel stayed close to Lyra, watching as more and more villagers came to her hut. Some came out of curiosity, some out of guilt, bringing food or cloth as if to undo years of turning their backs. Lyra accepted them politely, but her trust was still guarded. Only with Daniel did her shoulders truly relax. On the fourth morning, the sound of marching feet echoed up the hill. Daniel stepped outside, ready for a fight. But instead of masked attackers, it was a line of city guards carrying no weapons in hand. Their leader stepped forward, unrolling a sealed scroll. "By order of the People's Council," he announced, "the ruler has been removed from power." Gasps rippled through the air. The leader's eyes met Lyra's. "You are summoned to the palace, Lady Lyra of Velith." The walk back to the palace felt different this time. No longer were the streets lined with people whispering curses. Instead, they stood in silence, watching her with a strange mix of respect and uncertainty. Some even bowed their heads as she passed. Daniel walked at her side, his injured arm still wrapped in the blue cloth inside the palace gates. The courtyard was filled with members of the council and guards in ceremonial armor. The mark on Lyra's skin seemed to glow brighter in the sunlight. An elder councilwoman stepped forward, her voice steady. "You were wronged. And the truth was hidden. The mark you bear is no curse. It is an old royal seal, a sign of bloodline. Placed upon heirs during times of secrecy." Lyra's breath caught. It was twisted into a lie. The woman continued, "to strip you of your claim." A low murmur moved through the crowd. Daniel's eyes flicked to Lyra. Seeing the way her fingers curled as if gripping an invisible thread to keep herself steady, the councilwoman raised her voice. "We restore your name and offer you your place among the ruling family." The gates of the palace stood open now. The marble halls visible beyond. It was everything taken from her and more. Lyra looked at the open doors, then at Daniel. She saw the life she could have: wealth, servants, safety, but also the cold walls of a place where she had been betrayed. Her voice was calm but sure. "I will not live here." The councilwoman's brow furrowed. "You refuse the throne." "I refuse the chains that come with it," Lyra replied. "I want my name cleared. But my home is not in these walls." Gasps again. Some of the council looked offended. Others nodded in quiet respect. Daniel's lips curved in a small smile, pride shining in his eyes. The councilwoman inclined her head slowly. "As you wish, Lady Lyra. Your name is restored, your safety guaranteed." When they left the palace, the crowd parted for them. Children peeked from behind their parents, not with fear, but with curiosity. A little girl stepped forward shyly, offering Lyra a flower. Lyra knelt, taking it gently, and for the first time in years, she smiled without weight in her heart. The days that followed were slow and quiet. Daniel repaired the roof of her hut, and Lyra began tending a small garden. They still drew looks when they walked into the market. But now there were nods instead of insults. People no longer called her unfit. They called her Lady Lyra. And some even called her the untouchable who was touched. The name, once meant to hurt, had become a story of strength one evening. As the sun dipped low and painted the sea in gold, Lyra stood by the shore. Daniel joined her, hands in his pockets. "You could have been a queen," he said lightly. She glanced at him. "I have something better." "Oh, what's that?" he asked. "A life that is mine," she replied softly. "And someone who saw me before the world did." The wind carried the smell of salt and the sound of waves. Daniel looked at her, his voice steady. "I'd do it all again." Her fingers brushed his not by accident, but with quiet intent. They stood there as the tide rolled in, side by side. Two figures who had faced a lie and turned it into truth, far behind them, in the city. People still spoke of the day the human touched the untouchable. They spoke of how that touch had started something no ruler could stop. And in the small hut by the sea, Lyra and Daniel simply lived. Not as outcasts, not as rulers, but as two souls who had found each other when the world had turned away, a new beginning.